And good morning and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, May 9th. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined by my Skinny co-host, Ray Rowe, the editor-in-chief of Creative Loafing newspaper. Hey, Ray, good morning.
Good morning, Mitch. Nice to have you back here again.
Yeah, well, I'm back here for the duration after the legislature. Now, they are going to get back together some point, apparently not next week, and we're going to get into that in just a moment here on the program. We're also going to talk later in the show about schools and education and funding, and we've got Pinellas County School Board Chair Laura Hine will be in the studio to discuss that. But first, as we just said, the Florida regular 60-day legislative session was scheduled to end last Friday night, but because of serious differences on the budget between the state House of Representatives and the state Senate, the legislature, the only thing they're required to constitutionally do, which is pass a budget, they have not done it. So they are extended the session into June. We thought they were going to get together next week, but a release by House Speaker Danny Perez in just the last few minutes says that isn't going to happen. So joining us on the line right now from Orlando is Democratic State Representative Anna Eskamani. Good morning, Representative Eskamani.
Good morning, Mitch. It's great to be with you today.
All right, great. Hopefully, break up a little bit there. Hopefully, we can make sure the sound's going well. So, Anna, so I was going to ask you because I thought, I was kind of concerned, as I know you were, not to get official word, are you going back on Monday? Now, I know you're part of that select committee on taxing, and we'll get into that in a moment, the property taxes. And Perez says that group will meet on Tuesday. But it looks like there's the negotiations have really blown up here, and we're nowhere close to getting an agreement here on the budget.
You got it. And actually, the same moment that you had an update, we had an update. So there has been no internal communication to lawmakers. All of us are very much operating on at this point, spontaneous basis. And so, of course, it's incredibly frustrating knowing that we will be returning back to Tallahassee for a day trip to extend the session into potentially June 30th is what I'm hearing from the rumor mill. And, of course, we will still have our select committee meeting on property taxes, which is a very important topic for us to continue to explore. But it's definitely frustrating as it pertains to the state budget, as this is our one constitutional responsibility to pass a balanced budget. And we have many organizations whose contracts end July 1st, including organizations that focus on healthy mothers and new babies, and so different social services that are essential to the health and well-being of our state. And all these nonprofits, all these agencies are now going to be operating in a very unpredictable environment, which is not good for anyone.
Right. You just said the rumor is it's going to be extended until June 30th. Of course, as everybody knows, the budget has to be done by July 1. As you said, the fiscal year begins. It had originally been extended up until June 6th. But that's really scary, as you might go up until the end of June. So we'll get into that. And you mentioned, so let's talk about this. And of course, folks aren't really paying attention to this. It's really, there's a budget breakdown. The House budget is a smaller, I believe, $114 billion, roughly. The Senate, $118 billion. This is all about how big a tax break that they want to give to Floridians. And it's so fascinating. As you know, right now, Ron DeSantis is in Jacksonville holding a roundtable discussion almost exactly similar to what he did 2 days ago in Tampa, which he did the day before in Miami. And he is campaigning hard right now on the legislature doing a property tax of some sort right now. Now, we can get to those specifics in a minute. You are, as you mentioned a moment ago, part of this select committee to analyze property taxes about if in fact we were going to significantly reduce them or get rid of them outright, which probably is not going to be decided until a constitutional amendment in November of 2026. But it seems to me is that this is being responsible by House Speaker Perez, because this is such a major thing. There's no state in the country that has eliminated property taxes the way it works conventionally here. We already don't have a state income tax. So, how would you make up for that revenue? So you're part of that 37-member committee that met last Friday for the first time. Now you're going to meet next Tuesday. Apparently, you're going to meet throughout the year. So talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I love to. And I think it's important to ground ourselves in the numbers, right? And you gave a really great review already of some of the uniqueness to Florida and the fact that we don't have a state income tax, and we are very reliant on sales tax. And of course, at a local level, property taxes are the main source of revenue for public education, police, and fire, and other essential services. As a ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, a role that I've served on now for more than 6 years, my priority is always to deliver tax breaks to consumers while ensuring corporations pay what they owe and that special interests are not bending the tax structure to benefit themselves and erode free market principles. With that said, Florida families are struggling right now in varying degrees, the cost of housing, not just due to taxation, but I think even more so property insurance is pushing a lot of our families out as a renter. I can also tell you that rent has gone dramatically up since 2020, and many of us are struggling to make basic ends meet, to put food on the table. And this is where the legislature, in partnership with local government, can play a leadership role to try to alleviate costs and ensure collective prosperity. Now, with that said, the revenue generated from property taxes is upwards of $50 billion at the totality. Of course, you break that down to local governments. And remember, we have 67 counties, 400 some cities. So these are dollars that go directly back to a consumer in services. With that said, we do already have exemptions and programs in Florida that try to address the realities of someone on a fixed income or a first-time homeowner having an inability to pay their property taxes. And we have programs like portability, Save Our Homes. Of course, there's restrictions on property values based on longevity on that homestead. And so I don't think it's bad policy to examine these tax systems and see what changes can we make to alleviate these burdens. But I think you bring up a very important point that if you're going to attempt to eliminate property taxes in entirety, how do you replace $50 billion in lost revenue? Hypothetically, there could be tightening of some budgets, but even then, you're looking at least $45 billion in revenue that needs to be replaced. And the only alternative in this state really would take shape as an increase in sales tax, or potentially looking at the corporate income tax system and closing corporate tax loopholes. But even doing that at current CIT levels, which is the corporate income tax rate, you would only generate about $2 billion. So the numbers aren't mathing, right? And so we have to dive deep into this. And I'm actually honored to serve in this committee because I think it's important for us to have thoughtful, data-driven questions and answers and exploration of the property tax system. But it's a shame that all of it has become very political to the point where lawmakers can't even talk to each other. There's, of course, the battle with the governor and him traveling the state, campaigning on his vision and his perspective. Because at the end of the day, as lawmakers debate with one another, the situation on the ground doesn't change for the consumer, for the constituent. And so my focus will always be solving problems as fast as possible so we can deliver that relief versus getting caught up in our own egos and our own competitions between power.
Again, if you're just tuning in, you'll see the skinny here on WMNF. We're speaking with Orlando area Democratic State House Representative Anna Eskamani about the current situation, the budget breakdown, the impasse in Tallahassee. The legislature, we're just learning today, is probably, they're going to get together for the select committee that Representative Eskamani is on regarding property taxes, but the whole legislature is probably not going to get together even next week. So a lot up in the air. Let's talk about DeSantis, though. As you just mentioned a moment ago, you're very proud to be part of this select committee. He's not proud that you're on there, okay? Because he said this week that in fact Speaker Perez isn't serious about property taxes because in fact, because it's been put on, he's put on some of the most left-wing Democrats, which in my story I said, probably refers to you and maybe to a couple of members, Michelle Rayner and Diane Hart here in the Tampa area. He says with so many members on that select committee that it's going to just cancel itself out. It's not serious, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but let's just talk about the governor for just a moment, and that is the fact that He is basically now jumping on this idea of having property taxes now, not waiting till 2 years from now. He's talking about targeting for $1,000 for homestead property owners. Under the plan, the state would pay a portion of the property taxes that go to K-12 public schools, backfilling it with state money and giving homestead owners a rebate. This would allow homeowners to get the rebate later this year, which would be faster than the normal route of property tax cuts, where the legislature puts the measure on the ballot in 2026. He really seems to be maybe igniting even the war, but the battle between the House and the Senate here by blowing this up. And again, today he's in Jacksonville for the third day in a row campaigning on this. They're talking about Blazing Golia, who was with him on Wednesday in Tampa, says we're feeling a property tax revolt, like it's California in 1978 here. Like you said, this is very political, but this seems like it's, again, you guys have a month now or so to get this budget together. It's really seeming like it's chaotic right now.
It's pretty chaotic. I mean, the fact that we were on the House floor till 11 o'clock on what should have been last day legislative session and did not get news of a extended session with a concurring resolution until that time just speaks to the uncertainty and the unpredictable environment that we're operating in right now. But to the heart of your question regarding Governor Ron DeSantis and his railing against the role that Democrats are playing in policymaking, I hate to break it to him, but I was equally elected just like my other 119 colleagues in the state legislature, and I have won back-to-back elections. I've actually flipped my seat from red to blue in 2018, and I've served honorably since then. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, served in a leadership role in the tax committee. And I'm probably one of the most well-informed and qualified lawmakers to talk about taxation. And I'm absolutely needed in these conversations because of my expertise. And I would also amplify the point that as a renter, I also experience property taxes. They're passed down to me by my landlord. And so part of the conversations that we're having in this committee space is how do we ensure renters also benefit from property tax breaks? Because the governor's proposal is only going to benefit homeowners. There's no guarantee that it will be felt by every Floridian. And at the end of the day, every Floridian pays taxes, not just property owners. And so it's really important for us to approach this not with a Band-Aid, not with a political maneuver or a quick photo op, but with systemic change that will benefit every Floridian, that will help the renter become a homeowner, that will help the elder on a fixed income be able to not just get 1 year of relief, but to get permanent relief. So you can't look at this issue with such casualness or spontaneity. You have to be more intentional and think about it with staff, with tax experts, with local governments. In fact, one of the goals that I have this summer is to host a roundtable with my tax collector, my property appraiser, my school board members, local residents, to really hear directly from everyday folks and those who are practitioners in this realm of local governance, share their perspectives and share their concerns. And that's what it takes to pass good policy. But we all know that Governor Ron DeSantis is not committed to good policy. This is an individual that is always campaigning. He chooses politics over policy every day. And that's very much what we're experiencing right now.
Okay, again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Skinny right now. We're speaking to Orlando area Democratic House Rep and Eskamani. I'm Mitch Perry along with Ray Roa. Ray, let's talk about, to Representative Eskamani about some of the things that happened or didn't happen the last 9 weeks here in the session. Yeah,
Representative Eskamani, I'm thinking about, obviously you still have some work in front of you here, but a lot of people are doing postmortems here. I'm thinking of HB 6033, Representative Shane Abbott's attempt to repeal the Florida Labor Pool Act. HB 1225, that child labor bill that was approved in your chamber but died in the Senate. Both of those aren't going to the governor's desk, and I wonder if that signals a lack of appetite for passing laws that are harmful to workers. And with the Democratic Party in something of an identity crisis, does what happened to these bills open the door for a more labor-focused movement in the party, a labor coalition of sorts?
Yeah, I love this question, and I'm very proud to work in solidarity with my labor partners. I was just at the picket line with UAW here in Orlando earlier this week, and I'll be back with them over the weekend. And of course, in the state capitol, the presence of labor is constant. And you mentioned 2 bills, but there were actually, in addition, other anti-labor bills that either never got a hearing and didn't see the light of day. And I give credit to our labor partners for their incredible work in organizing at the local level and in Tallahassee to pack committee rooms and to demonstrate united solidarity across issues. In fact, whenever we have these bills, whether it's a labor pool repeal or child labor, it's pretty incredible the number of organizations and everyday people that show up across the spectrum. So it's not just labor showing up, it's also the research think tanks who are speaking to how removing the Labor Pool Act is going to impact some of our most vulnerable workers, who are returning citizens, who are non-English speakers, who are trying to build towards economic mobility through labor pools. And of course, we also saw immigrant organizations step up to testify against these bills and to also make the point clear that Governor Ron DeSantis stated publicly that he wants to replace immigrant labor with children. And so I want to give kudos to all these phenomenal organizations from ACLU to SPLC and FPI and so many others who, in addition to labor, help organize against these bills. So to your point, we were able to prevent these policies from moving forward. I was very pleased to see the Labor Pool Act bill TP'd. This was partly due to the fact that we kept making the point in Florida that we don't have a state OSHA, despite the fact that the bill sponsor kept trying to counter that and say that we do. He eventually realized that we actually don't, after many of us made that point. And that's a really important piece of this conversation, because on the proactive front, Florida Democrats do need to lead on the economy. And being pro-worker while challenging corporate greed is one of the most effective policies that we can lead on. And I know that because conservatives are trying to co-opt it from us. I had the displeasure of listening to a clip from a far-right podcaster this morning that someone sent to me, and he is using terminology around anti-special interest, anti-corporatist. I mean, he sounds like a progressive. Of course, you know, his positions on other issues would say otherwise, but the reality is that individuals who are supportive of President Trump have co-opted a lot of these platforms that historically were aligned with Democrats, and we cannot let that happen. And I think when you look at the votes on the House floor, you can see that the co-opting is a fabrication. It's not reality, because the votes speak for themselves. Republicans are overwhelmingly voting to allow Florida to weaken child labor laws. They're voting to repeal Labor Pool Act. They're voting to bust public unions. They're voting on a sub-minimum wage.
Yeah, that was crazy.
On a sub-minimum wage, which is against the federal law and designed to create litigation to challenge Florida's $15 minimum wage that the voters approved years ago. So I agree to the premise of your question, but I just want to emphasize that Democrats need to step up on these issues. But in the sense of the Democratic caucus, we did. I mean, there was alignment from moderate to more progressive Democrats in opposition to these issues. And I am grateful for that, because I think it does speak to how, despite national headlines of disorganization, I would argue the Democratic House caucus, as small as we are very united. And oftentimes we find ourselves leading the conversation on these topics, and we're proud to do so.
Again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. It's 11:25 a.m. We're speaking with State Rep Anna Eskamani. We've got Laura Hine from the Pinellas County School Board in a few minutes to talk with us. You mentioned Representative Eskamani. I got to talk about immigration. You're out there, of course, in Orange County. We all know, we're here in Hillsborough. We know what Governor DeSantis did in firing Andrew Warren, and at one point, Orange and Osceola County State Attorney Monique Worrell for not obeying the law, essentially. But look at what we have here with Attorney General James Uthmeier, his former chief of staff, who we named to replace Ashley Moody a few months ago. So, as you know very well, you were up there, of course. There was a special session earlier this year on immigration. The legislature passed a law that allows state law enforcement agencies to arrest undocumented. They come across state lines. The ACLU has filed a lawsuit against this. A federal judge in South Florida has since suspended the law and said that law enforcement agencies should not make any arrests. However, Attorney General Uthmeier said he will not tell state law enforcement agencies to obey that order, essentially thumbing his nose at that order. Governor DeSantis, as we mentioned, was in Tampa on Wednesday. I asked him, do you stand behind James Uthmeier in basically disobeying a federal judge? The governor said yes. He said, quote, he's right on the law. He has the courage to stand and do what's right, even though he knows he's going to get blowback. He said there's a role for the judiciary, but it's to decide a case and a controversy before you. It's not to go outside the bounds of judicial policy or judicial role and try to enact policy. Now, we won't get into the intricacies of why the governor believes that, but nevertheless, the governor and the attorney general are basically saying, disobey a federal judge here. Now, we should say that that judge in South Florida on May 29th could hold Attorney General Uthmeier in contempt. She has said that. Your thoughts about this?
It's very ironic that the party of law and order does not seem to care about law or order. James Uthmeier should be in prison for laundering public Medicaid dollars to political organizations to campaign against Amendment 3. And hopefully in the months ahead, we will see federal charges holding him accountable for that behavior. And at the end of the day, we have a system of checks and balances with three branches of government. It's what makes our country so unique and modeled across the world. And to disrespect the judicial branch should alarm everyone, regardless of your political affiliation, whether you supported Governor DeSantis or not, whether you supported Trump or not. The fact that you have elected officials, in the case of James Uthmeier, appointed officials, ignoring a decision by a judge is so not only unsettling, but it's so hypocritical. Because as someone who worked in reproductive rights and abortion access before I ran for office, for those who don't know, I worked at Planned Parenthood of Southwest and Central Florida before I ran for office. When we got an order from a judge to enforce an anti-abortion bill, that is what we did. We did not have a choice to ignore a decision from a judge. And when organizations who provide abortion unintentionally ignore orders by a judge, as we've seen in some cases where providers did not know to implement the 24-hour delay law for abortion access, and then they were aggressively feed and fined by ACA for not following the law. What James Uthmeier is doing just sets an unsettling precedent, and he needs to be held accountable for it. And so it just further speaks to how broken our not our political system, but how broken some of these politicians are, where they're so committed to their own thirst for power and control that they are ignoring the very Constitution they took an oath on. And we have to do everything we can to hold them accountable at the ballot box. But of course, in this situation, supporting the organizations who are leading the charge on these lawsuits, because if it wasn't for them, we would be in an even worse situation than we are now, which I know feels for some hard to fathom. But if it's not for organizations like the ACLU, the SPLC, for others who are funding litigation and pushing forward on our constitutional rights, then we wouldn't even have the ability to attempt to enforce what our Constitution calls for and what our laws are in the books to do.
We just have you for a few more minutes, Representative Eskamani. So a couple more questions for you. You mentioned, of course, about the Democratic Party. We know the party took another blow last month when your then Senate leader, Jason Pizzo, said that the party was, quote, dead, and he was re-registering as a non-party affiliated voter. This was another blow to a party that had seen a number of blows in recent years, including the departures of a couple of your colleagues last December, including Hillsborough County's Susan Valdez and South Florida's Hillary Cassell. Pizzo was quite critical. You can react to his statements or not, but I mean, essentially, I want to know from you, and I know, you're obviously moving on. You got one more year in the and the legislature before you run for Orlando mayor. But what do your thoughts about this, in terms of the Senate leader basically, jumping ship at that particular point of the legislative session?
I appreciate this question. I do think that nearly every flip that has happened the past 6 months is more opportunistic than it is values driven. And it's not a coincidence that Jason Pizzo flipped to NPA the same day that David Jolly flipped to Democrat with the intention of running for governor. And so I think it's important for listeners to peel the layers back here because it's just not as black and white as one might think. There are benefits to flipping a party depending on the environment around you. And I do think that's a part of a lot of the decision making. With that said, the Democratic Party has a lot of work to do. We're facing a voter registration deficit over 1 million. We don't have resources in the state coffers, which is why I'm very focused on local organizing, and I do my own political organizing through People Power for Florida, my political committee that does voter registration and empowerment. Of course, I raise my own funds for my campaign programming because I've never looked towards outside sources to fund my work. I'm self-reliant in that way, and I encourage other candidates to operate in that same fashion. But I speak with confidence in knowing that there are amazing staffers and amazing community organizers who are on the ground, despite the odds, doing the work to rebuild progressive infrastructure and to ultimately rebuild a new Democratic Party. But it's not going to happen overnight. And despite the headlines, there are some phenomenal folks putting their name in the ring to run for office next cycle. And we do have plans here in Central Florida to work towards flipping legislative seats. And so we can't get distracted. We have to keep our eyes on the prize. But at the end of the day, that means doing the work of door knocking and raising funds and being proactive versus just reactive. And that's why I'm actually starting my canvas program for my Orlando mayor's race, which is in 2027. I'm starting tomorrow. We will be knocking on doors in the city of Orlando tomorrow for a race that is in 2027. And that's not because I have lots of free time. It is because I know how important it is to get out early to talk to voters who are not typically engaged in especially municipal elections and to build a relationship with our constituents to prove that we are worth electing.
Before we let you go, there is one caller who just wants to get on the phone with you, so we're going to bring him up. This is Kelly from Tampa. Hello, Kelly, you're on the air.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Actually, Anna just answered the question I was going to ask. First of all, let me just say thank you for leading with integrity and moral clarity in Tallahassee, calling out these opportunistic, refried Republicans and flip-floppers, and we don't have enough of people like you doing that. I wish you the best in your run for Orlando mayor, and I wish you would run for governor.
All right, Kelly, thank you very much. And with that, we'll let you go there. State Representative.
Hold on, can we ask her if she's going to run for governor?
No, I think she's got to just announce he's running for mayor. Come on. First things first. On Eskamani, thank you so much. I'm curious, by the way, and I'll stay in touch with you when you do have that meeting with local folks there about dealing with this whole issue with property taxes later this summer. I'd love to be a part of covering that, actually. So thank you so much for joining us here on The Skinny this morning.
Thank you so much. And thank you to that kind caller. I appreciate the good vibes. And one day I feel confident if we can continue to move towards authentic progressive leadership, then we can get our state in the right posture to elect leaders that reflect those values. So I appreciate the caller, and we'll stay focused and do the work.
All right. State Representative Anna Eskamani from Orlando joining us here on The Skinny. Thank you so much. All right. We're going to pivot now live in the studio. Stay kind of related to what's going on up in Tallahassee, but we're back here home here. We've got Pinellas County School Chair Laura Hine in studio. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning, Mitch. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here with us. And for folks who aren't familiar with Laura, we should say that, of course, she was just reelected last fall, originally elected in 2020, a U.S. Naval Academy grad with an MBA from USF, the former founding president and director of Friends of North-South North Shore Elementary, a formerly struggling school based in Northeast St. Petersburg, has come a long way since, and you can tell us a little more about that later on here. Well, Helen, I wanted to bring you on here, and I'm so grateful you came in because you wrote an op-ed in the Times last Sunday, and I know you actually mentioned this on the school last month, a school board meeting, and that is we're all focused about these tax cuts and all that if you're following policy up at Tallahassee. But you said, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of this. I know we don't talk about it much covering the legislature right now, and that is that the Florida Legislative Budget Commission has said that we've got upcoming budget deficits coming up in the next couple of years, and that's going to have a real big impact on local school districts like Pinellas County. And tell us, what's maybe behind all that in terms of like the fact that, I think what's the statistic you said basically that Florida public schools have been funded below inflation year over year for the past 20 years because of vouchers. So let's get into that.
I will. Thank you. So I wrote that opinion piece specifically to raise awareness. So I'm glad that you and some others have seen it. I've also started to communicate about this issue, whether it's in our school board meetings or on social media, because people aren't aware. You don't hear people saying, "Hey, Florida's facing a deficit." You hear us talking about tax cuts, and so, that MBA you mentioned is actually in finance. I've been a business leader. I've been a military officer. I've been a whole range of things in my career. I am a commercial general contractor. I built the Southwest Airlines terminal. I was number 2 on that project. So managing finances and fiduciary responsibility, I take that very seriously. And once I was elected a school board member, I take both academic responsibility and fiduciary responsibilities seriously. So as I dove into our budget, and it's a $1.6 billion budget for Pinellas County schools, that's a lot of money. And we need people who are taking a look and understanding where it's coming from, what the revenue sources are, what the expenses are, and how we can manage that and provide excellence in our academic education. So from the earliest days, I started looking at the budget because you often hear people say, "Oh, there's not enough money. There's not enough money." I said, $1.6 billion, it's got to be enough money. Let's look at how we're spending it. Well, as I've continued to look, every year we get our budget draft from the state, and the House puts out a budget, the Senate puts out a budget, the governor's office does. And this year they were talking about a 1% raise to the education budget, 1% from the House. So it was about 1.8% from the Senate. And I just, we experience inflation just like you, just like everybody does, right? We buy groceries, but we served 8.5 million lunches last year. 8.5 million lunches. That's a lot of groceries. And so when you're getting a 1% increase, think about the inflationary cost to the budget that we serve. At any rate, as I start looking into it, why? Why is it only 1%? If we know that inflation also gives additional revenue into the state, right? Because that sales tax is also slightly inflated with the inflated cost. Why is education funded below inflation? And as you said, I educated people that it has been for 20 years. For 20 years, it's been systematically funded below inflation. Well, this year, I started looking at the Legislative Budget Commission report. Anybody can look this up. This isn't Laura Hine. It's the Senate Appropriations Committee, the House Appropriations Committee. Every year, they publish a 3-year financial outlook for the state of Florida. Well, if you look at it, the coming fiscal year, we're okay. We're about $2.6 billion in the plus. But the very next year, we're exactly opposite. We're $2.6 billion in deficit, and then almost $7 billion in deficit in year 3. And alarms are going off in my head as I'm reading this. And I think, are they talking about this? I don't hear anybody talking about this deficit. Why? Well, the report tells us why. Really, really clearly. The number one reason we are facing a deficit is education, which I'm going to talk more about. Yeah. And a very close second is Medicaid. On the education front, I want to make really clear that this is not our K-12 public schools. It's not the budget of our K-12 public schools that is putting us into deficit. And the report spells this out. What it is that in 2023, the state of Florida decided to rapidly expand the voucher program. So people might remember that 25 years ago when we first started vouchers, right? 25 years ago. Under Jeb Bush, yeah. Right? And yeah, we could go a lot into that history. We also, 25 years ago, is when we started school accountability. the accountability system that provides the grades for school, right? A school, B school. We started the state test and really focused on ROI, that return on investment. How can the state demonstrate that these large amount of tax dollars is going to good use, or which schools are struggling and where we do need to shine the flashlight? So I do believe in that kind of fiscal and academic accountability. Yeah. But then the vouchers for non-public students came about first with students with disabilities under the McKay Scholarship, right? And so students who couldn't get their needs met because of disabilities could get that voucher to get those needs met elsewhere. I absolutely support that, and I think most people do. And then it blended into low-income students. Now, through the Florida tax credit. So what that means, what a tax credit means is that a company, instead of paying the corporate tax credit or excise or alcohol beverage sales tax or a number of different tax credits that they can get, they give money to the Step Up for Students side for this voucher for students with low income who are in a struggling public school. So that's a really important piece. They're already in a struggling public school. They're low income, which the legislature first defined as 150% of the federal poverty level. This is back in 2001, 2005. They start gradually raising that low income, 200%, 300% of the federal poverty level, up to the point where almost half of Floridians qualify as low income to get one of these vouchers, to get you to leave your public school and go to a non-public school. So that's where we stood about 3 years ago. And I would say it went from $50 million in 2001 of diverted tax revenue to almost $1 billion. So every year it grew and grew and grew to about $1 billion cost. Well, in 2023, the legislature passed what's called universal vouchers. So I don't think people understand that now there is no income limit at all, and you can already be in private school.
So this is a whole escalation. I compared to being on steroids, basically, from what we already had. And it was the then House Speaker, Paul Renner, that was his baby. I think it was called HB1 that year, and that was the big priority. And it got pushback from, the education folks, public school folks, but it just there wasn't, we just heard Representative Eskamani, there's only so many people that are going to be contesting that. So this has radically changed in just a couple of years. Like you said, the economic, what your schools are getting right now. Right. And,
right. Well, I what I would point out is that while it was $1 billion a few years ago, it's now $4 billion. So the state has taken on an entirely new expense stream, right? Again, these are not students leaving public schools. This isn't what people might hear when they say, oh, the money should follow the student. These are not students leaving public schools. As a matter of fact, we have a net gain of students. More students return to Pinellas County schools than leave Pinellas County schools. So that's not what this is. This is an entirely new expense to students who are already in non-public schools or homeschooling and have been doing that perhaps for years, but they now get equal funding.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Pinellas County School Chair Laura Hine, talking about the funding going on, the vouchers, et cetera, in Tallahassee and how it's affecting the school district here. Now, Chair Hine, you just had mentioned this. I was seeing this story, though. I copied and pasted. I forget where I got this from. I think of a local television station. You are experiencing low student enrollment now, right? Is that correct? Record school low enrollment. And I believe Kevin Hedrick, who's the superintendent, he has said that says we know it's not perfect. We wish we had more dollars. We wish we had more people in the classroom, to your point, assisting more students, but we also have to balance our budget. So they're saying that this is also attributed to hurricanes, high living costs, and low birth rates are keeping enrollment down.
Right.
And the state estimates enrollment in Pinellas will drop by almost 3,000 students going into next year. And because of this, 400 teaching positions will not be refilled.
That's right.
Okay.
So I can show you all of the charts on this, and exactly what you said is there is correct. You can look at Pinellas County demographic data, and so we are a peninsula in Pinellas, right? We are landlocked. Our cost of living has been going up and up and up. And while people are moving here, those are people who don't have children moving into the towers that are being built and all those beautiful places. And welcome. But what's happening is people with young kids can't afford to live in Pinellas anymore. Our teachers are struggling to live in Pinellas. And so our enrollment has been declining, but it's declining primarily because of affordability, and birth rate. We have all of that information.
Yeah.
So what you'll see, and again, we have all the numbers of enrollment in public charter. Charter in Hillsborough is super stable. It's been around 7,000 students just consistently for a decade. But on the scholarship part, here's the number to understand. Just 5 years ago, in Pinellas County, we had about 2,400 students, 2,400 students who got that McKay or Gardner voucher, which is for students with disabilities. That came to about $16 million, right? And then this universal voucher thing passes. Non-public schools, private schools are sending emails to their families saying, apply for this, the money comes to the school. We now have 17,000 students accepting state tax dollars to the tune of $168 million just in Pinellas County. So we went from 16 million 5 years ago to 168 million just in Pinellas County, students receiving the tax dollars. So I think an important thing to point out is, so every year the state says this is what the Florida Education Finance Program is going to fund per student. And so this past year they were funding a per student amount of $9,163. So that's how we receive revenue. The number of students you have times that dollar that the legislature comes up with, and that's their budget for you. And what they've done is given that exact amount of money now to students already enrolled in private school or homeschool also. So if you're homeschooling your 3 kids, as of 2 years ago, you now get $27,000 of tax dollars in order to do that. Now, I do want to say we are not the first state to dip our toes, or we should say jump into universal vouchers. And it's bankrupting Arizona. It's bankrupting Arkansas. And Texas has been watching. Texas and Florida have been in a race to see who could jump into universal vouchers first. I don't know why this is a conservative issue. In my opinion, there is nothing conservative about the use of these tax dollars to unaccountable education. We should be achieving excellence in education. By the way, spoken as a non-party affiliate, but at any rate, Texas.
Important to note because, in fact, didn't Governor DeSantis want to take you out last year in the election?
Yes, that's right. That's
you don't want to talk about it, but that's.
I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, it's unreasonable. I don't know the governor. He doesn't know me. I'm a fellow Navy veteran, and I really, should a governor weigh in on local school board races? I guess people can decide that for themselves. But what I do know is I work really hard, and I care about excellence in education, and I care about academic and fiduciary responsibility. So an important thing to note about this $4 billion going out, if you're good with that, okay. But I want you to understand that they are not accountable the way your public schools are. So if you want to know what's happening in our schools, you see that state grading system that we talked about earlier, right? These schools, these students, they don't take the test. There is 70%
talking
of the
about charter
schools in
schools,
Florida.
we're talking about homeschooled students.
Charter does. Charter take the test, and charters get school grades, and we can talk more about dicing all of that if you want to. I will talk about this all day long. But at any rate, I do want to point out that $4 billion, those schools, those students do not take the test. 70% of the schools that take the money in Florida are unaccredited by any academic agency.
How many? What's the percentage?
70%. 70%. And also in Pinellas County, I want to say this really clear. We all know some excellent private schools. And our child even attended one for a little while till I came alive to how important public education is to this country. And so there are great private schools. But there are also schools that we just need to know if we believe in return on investment for public tax dollars, your tax dollars, right? All of us pay in, whether it's sales tax, property tax, we all pay in. Then that accountability should also apply to any education opportunity that's receiving our tax dollars. I believe that. I believe in that fiscal and academic accountability.
Let me ask you this, Chairwoman. Thinking about income limits for voucher eligibility. Mm-hmm. Well, when you bring this up in conversations, what kind of arguments against reining in eligibility based on income come up?
You know what? Sometimes people will say, and honestly, there's very little argument because people are pretty shocked. Most people are absolutely unaware that there is now a multimillionaire family now gets $27,000 to go to name your private school.
I went to Jesuit High School. I watched my dad struggle to put me through there. But then at the same time, shouldn't, my classmate whose dad makes a lot more have the same opportunity? I don't know. So I don't know what these conversations are like.
Well, so it's an interesting question. And by the way, my nephew graduated from Jesuit High School last year. It's an extraordinary school, and we could talk more about that. Here's the thing. I think people will say, well, it's the parents' money, right? We pay in taxes, and if we're paying towards K-12 education, we should be able to take that money and go somewhere else if we want to. Okay, but if you look at the median house value, and I'm Pinellas, so with the median home value in Pinellas, that home pays $670 a year towards K-12 taxes. The voucher value is $9,100. So for every $1 that family is spending for one child, right, their neighbors, you, me, everybody, is spending $13, right? And so my concern is about the accountability with tax dollars, really. I think, parents are going to make the best choices. We say parents choose for their kids. Parents are the best judge of what's right for the kids. You're darn right they are. I am a parent also. When it comes to fiduciary responsibility of public tax dollars, which is the job of elected leaders, that is our job, then we have to make sure that $4 billion and every other billions of dollars that we send for education is going towards excellence.
And forgive me if I don't know the answer to this, but on the county level, is there a way for the school board to, decide where this money goes and the eligibility for it, or is it all preempted from Tallahassee?
No. This isn't part of the school board role at all. We quite literally take the money they give us, whether it's federal. We get about 11% from federal. For us in Pinellas, it's about 23% from state, and then the rest is local. That's another discussion about property tax values, but we have to receive the revenue we get, and then we have to figure out how to best spend it to achieve that excellence.
That is the voice of Pinellas County School Board Chair Laura Hines. She's in studio with myself, Mitch Perry, along with Ray Rowe here on the Skinny and WMNF. It's 11:52. We've got about 8 minutes left to go here. We did get a text message from a listener who says, I disagree with vouchers for all. It should have stayed with low-income kids. And he writes, is Laura aware that John Kirtley lobbied heavily and spent a lot on school board races statewide in the past few years? John Kirtley, he is involved with the voucher movement. Who was he?
I think he might be the head of the Step Up for Students program.
Okay, right, the big program there. I guess the question is, are you aware that he was spending money on these races?
No.
Yeah, okay.
No, I'm not.
And you won relatively easy last re-election last fall?
It was about 70-30.
Oh, my God. Yeah, great.
And I'm a county-wide seat. You know what I don't think people realize about school board races? More people vote in my little school board race than for Congress. So depending on your jurisdiction, it can be a pretty significant election, and it is very important. Can I say something about the low income part? So I agree that if you are a low income student stuck in a struggling school, you should have a chance. I also think that it is, per the state Constitution, our responsibility to provide a high quality education. If that school is struggling, what about the other 400 kids in that school? What are we doing about them? So we're going to provide life rafts out, okay, up to a certain income amount, but then what? How do we invest and make sure that all of those kids in those struggling schools are getting an opportunity for excellence in education? It affects our national security.
Right.
It affects our economic prosperity. It's imperative that we be excellent at education.
Now, I read, moving off topic a bit, but we just got here for a few minutes, Pinellas County Schools are increasing its lunch school prices for the school year beginning this fall, right? So the price of an elementary school meal will increase by 50 cents at $2.75. Price of a middle school meal will increase by 40 cents, and the price of a high school meal will increase $1. Why is that happening?
That's right. Well, we haven't increased our prices in 5 years or even more. And as I mentioned earlier, if inflation affects us too, with those 8.5 million.
And I also want to ask you about the situation with ICE, because I know our publication, actually, I think was one of the first people to report about this. It's going back last month. The Pinellas County Schools announced that they were backing off from an agreement with the federal government to deputize school police for immigration enforcement efforts. That had been reported initially that you were doing that, but you're not any longer. Where are we at with that?
That's right. I mean, I think it was an administrative error, frankly. It was the form was pushed out. You have to sign it. Our school chief of police, who's an amazing man, thought he had to sign it, signed it, and then we said, whoa, we don't have to sign it.
Right. Going back to, with the school board and what people think, I know you did make some of these comments recently at the school board. Do you, is any of your colleagues weigh in on this at all, on this issue?
Well, so surprisingly, and the first time I spoke about it was actually at our workshop. So I spoke about it last week at the school board at the dais, but then at the workshop the week prior, I actually passed out handouts with my charts and everything like this. And again, this is Laura Hine talking, not the Pinellas County School Board, right? This is my research over the years to try to figure out what is going on with funding. But I was amazed at all the school board members who said thank you. I had no idea. We don't even know. And it's our world, right? And so more and more people, as I've started to share this information and simply ask the question of, do you want accountability for your tax dollars? Do we want the same fiscal and academic accountability to apply everywhere that public tax dollars go for education? It's really a simple question.
You mentioned having a countywide seat. We talked about Ron DeSantis, the way he targeted you in your last election, and sometimes state politics do start to infiltrate in there. But can you give us a temperature check on parents and what you hear from them countywide as far as their how much the partisan and this big level politics is informing their decisions? Are they tired? Are they fatigued? Or does it play into kind of the feedback you're getting on the board and things like that? People
want excellence, strength, and stability in their schools and in their lives, right? They don't want all of this turbulence that has seemed to be caused in the last handful of years, especially. They want strength and stability. And that's what I hear. And what I also hear overwhelmingly is how much people love their schools. I'm the treasurer of the PTA at Johns Hopkins Middle School. I continue to be involved as a mom. I coach the boys volleyball team. I give kids rides to the basketball games, etc. So I also tutor Algebra 1 at that middle school. So I'm very involved at the local level with parents and teachers. And what I hear from them is overwhelming support and need for investment in their schools.
So people always say they hate Congress, but they love their congresspersons. Like with schools, there's so much animosity towards the system. When you boil it down to the neighborhoods and the PTAs,
right.
There's just so much pride and joy for the schools.
That's right.
Themselves.
I think it's really important to try to keep the politics as much as we can away from the teachers, because what they do every day, that is the number one impact on a student's chance of success is their teachers. So this is Teacher Appreciation Week. Thank you to all the amazing teachers.
I know you're sort of an evangelist on this espousing this information, getting out to people. Can we see you possibly getting outside of Pinellas County and talking about this?
I'd love to. Yeah. Again, it's my favorite subject. The education of children and the future of our country is my favorite subject, and I will talk about it to anybody, anytime.
We've got a couple minutes left to go. What else do you want to say about what's going on with Pinellas County Schools? We have about a minute and a half here.
Oh, well, we are entering graduation season. I actually went to my first graduation this morning. It's really exciting. I do want to tell people, if you don't have kids in school right now, I know a lot of people can think, oh my gosh, kids these days, they are amazing. I am going to encourage you to visit, if not volunteer, in your local school, because when you go there and when you see the teachers, the principals, and you work with the kids, you will feel better about the world being okay, because there are such good things happening at our schools.
You moved to education. You were in the art museum world, right, for a while. Right. I mean, you've done obviously several things.
So I was an officer in the Navy. Yeah. So I was on ships out of San Diego, and then when I came home, commercial general contractor, and I was the project director for Tom and Mary James when they developed the James Museum of Western and Wildlife Art in that whole city block. So I was in charge of the architecture and construction. And then he said, how about you be a museum director? And now it does happen that my husband is the director of the Dali Museum. Yeah. That does not make me a museum director, but I've probably been to more museums than the average human being. And so at any rate, I did it. It was amazing. I loved it. But what I wake up thinking about and go to bed thinking about is education. And so I did step away from that job as much as I loved it. And this is what I do full time.
All right. Laura Hine, Pinellas County School Board Chair, thank you so much for coming in and meeting us here at the studio of the Skinny here, and we'll continue to follow your efforts here.
Thank you, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
We always appreciate anybody from Pinellas coming over, and always in awe of anybody who runs for a countywide school board seat.
So, Ray, will I see you at Heatwave tomorrow?
Hopefully. We'll see. I have my kid tomorrow, so we'll see if he can make it, but really excited about Heatwave and I have so many fond memories of being at the Cuban Club as a younger person. So much good stuff happening at Heatwave, and we hope to see everybody at Heatwave. A celebration, really, for WMNF Tampa and its rich history, and the way that the listeners have really lifted this up. And we thank all of you guys for joining us here today on WMNF Tampa. On behalf of myself, Mitch Perry, Anna Eskamani at the top of the program, Laura Hine, chairwoman of the Pinellas County School Board. Thank you for being here. Skip Sassy running the boards for us today. Irene Matthews on the phone. Please stay tuned. Joellen Schilke is in Studio 1 with the mood light set perfectly. She has Art in Your Ear coming up for you. We'll see you at Heatwave, and we'll see you next week.
All right. See you then.
WMNF Tampa.